Recording. Great. So welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. So just as a reminder, we are going to record this session and we'll be sending you an email after the session is over. And so that if anybody who registered will have access to that. So if you didn't have a chance to see it and you're just going to catch up on the recording, that's great. Or maybe if you have to step out, or if you have other people that need your attention in your new home office, then please know that you'll have this recording available to you afterwards. Or alternatively, if this is something that you think that you want to host in your own district or with your own school board or at your own school, then you would be very welcome to use the recording. You could lead your own session with your teachers with the resources that we've made available to you. So I encourage you to do that if you think that that's something that would appeal to people in your own community of practice or at your own school. So welcome and good morning. Thanks everybody for being here for our first virtual professional development session. I am going to pop things over to my screen in a moment, and I'm going to leave everybody's videos off and everybody muted just so we can keep the bandwidth down and some of the background noise. So I do encourage you, if you have something to say for the group or if you have something to say to me, please get comfortable with the chat window. So that's just on the right-hand side, upper right-hand side of your screen. You should see a chat window there. So I see lots of people are popping in to say who they are and where they're teaching and what teachables, which is great. And I see lots of familiar names, lots of new names. So this is a really great way for us to all get together. I'm going to switch over and I'm going to put my screen on to my presentation so that everybody can see that. Let's do this. We're all getting so comfortable now with all of these sharing screens. I'm sure we're going to be pros now with all this virtual sessions. Here we go. So I'm just going to turn off my video for now as well, just so that we don't have any delays for people as we're going through, and then I'll pop back in when we do our discussions. So here we are delivering our very first in-person professional development session, or in-person live session. We have been delivering, AKFC has been delivering sessions throughout the country for almost about 5 years now, and we have been wanting to explore ways to reach more teachers virtually, and so this was what gave us the push to try this out. So before we jump in, as I said, we are recording the session and I'm going to keep everybody on mute and the cameras off just so that we help with the bandwidth here for the presentation. And we're going to be monitoring the questions in the question board there in the chat window. So feel free to pop them in there at any time and we'll take some breaks as we go through to look at those. And I also have some moderators on the call, which I'm going to introduce in a second as well. So I would say too, if you're having a hard time hearing me, then just pop a note in the chat window as well, and we'll make sure that we adjust the audio so that everybody can hear. I'm going to put on some headphones, I think, here so that we make sure we don't get any background noise. Like many of you, I have young people at home with me who are thankfully outside for a bike ride with their dad, so hopefully we won't have too many interruptions. So my name is Catherine Boyes, and I've been with Aga Khan Foundation Canada now for 10 years. And I work in our front-facing and our frontline work, and I work with our domestic education portfolio, so working with teachers, but also working with youth and working with our youth engagement and some of our volunteers as well. So today I'm also joined by my friend Michelle, who is on the call right now. And maybe Michelle, I'll get you to unmute yourself in a minute. You can turn your video on if you'd like, and you can tell us a little bit about some of this partnership here and some of the work that you are doing. Are you over there, Michelle? Can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, I realized I threw over to you too soon. I'll tell a little bit about sort of this partnership that we're doing, and then I'll let you talk a bit more about the online classroom and the things that people can expect. How's that sound?
Perfect.
Okay, so we have been, Canadian Geographic Education and Aga Khan Foundation Canada have been crossing paths at education workshops and conferences for the last few years. And we've had lots of people in our workshops that we know are going from one to the other for sessions. So we thought it was probably a good time for us to, see how we can work together and what kind of workshops that we can be offering and resources that we can be offering together. We know that time is so valuable, that there are lots of resources out there, but it's really tricky to find the time, to go through and to figure out what you want to use in your classroom. So we wanted to try to narrow that down a little bit and offer some resources that are sort of cross-curricular that you could be using in your classrooms. So I'm going to throw it over to Michelle, and she's going to tell you a little bit about some of the things we have planned for next week and this new online platform that they're working with. Over to you, Michelle.
All right, I'm going to set up my camera here just so everyone can see me.
Yeah,
so you can put a face to your name.
Perfect.
So, hi everyone. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. I hope you're all safe and that your families are doing well and that you're finding some time for some serenity and positivity in these crazy times. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle, manager of Canadian Geographic Education, and I'm thrilled to have so many of you with us today. I see some familiar names on the list, so I'm going to shout out Sarah in Newfoundland and Rola in Ottawa. And I see some new faces and some new names, so I'm going to shout out Stephen in Alberta, Shiraz in British Columbia, Laurette in Manitoba, and Akinlolu in New Brunswick. So welcome. Catherine has prepared a really special session for us today, and I'm excited to be a part of it because I really think geography is connected to everything. At the heart of geography is the opportunity to learn all about finding patterns and making connections to how people and space interact with one another. And at the heart of international development and sustainable development is the need to meet human development goals while simultaneously sustaining our natural system. So to me, the two just go naturally hand in hand together. Canadian Geographic Education is the educational department of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. We're an affiliate of Canadian Geographic Magazine, and we have over 25,000 teachers who are members across Canada. So those of you who have just joined us today, that means you get our newsletter, access to our resources, you can apply for our grants, and you can have us come out and do sessions when school is back. And so I would like to share my screen. I have just a few resources I think are going to be great for you. I'm just going to get that done now. Share. All right. So this is our host website. Very out of date, I apologize, but useful nonetheless. We have all of our resources listed under the resource tab. Of most importance to you are our lesson plans. So we have infographics, we have video content, we have worksheets that can be printed and used, and we have interactive websites, one of which is, I'm just going to double check everyone can hear me. Okay. One of which is Charting Change. So this is a website about international development stories. So you can click on any of these blogs and you'll have access to a story and a worksheet for your students. We have a brand new website called the Canadian Geographic Education Online Classroom. This is a little bit more up to date, as you can see. This is where we're posting new content on a daily basis. And this week we've added something of interest. So we have a new Google Voyager story that explores the locations featured in the full-length film Anthropocene. And so I just wanted to show you what that looks like. So you can check out a Google Voyager story that takes you all around the world and shows you some really great imagery. We have our Anthropocene Education Program website where there's multimedia that touches on sustainability and human development goals across the world. And so some of those include interactive websites where you can explore imagery in great detail and get additional information that way. We have a nice map called A Developing World, which is interactive. So if you left click on one country and right click on the other, you can compare demographic data across both. And I also wanted to point out we do have a number of Indigenous educational resources, which I think apply because the Sustainable Development Goals include issues that Canada needs to tackle, centered around poverty eradication, economic growth, and environmental protection as they apply to Indigenous peoples in Canada. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to pass it back to Catherine. And I just want to note that I'll be monitoring the chat section. So if you have any questions or any comments, that's what I'm here for.
That's great. Excellent. Thanks, Michelle. That's lovely. Yeah, we're super excited about this partnership. And so next week, we're going to have a new thing coming out every day. So do keep an eye on that online classroom so that you can follow along. And we'll be posting things on both of our social media accounts, which will send you all that information. So let me jump in. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the slide deck again. And we're going to jump in to getting into talking about some of the development side of work here. So for those of you that haven't heard of Aga Khan Foundation Canada, I am going to give you sort of a very quick rundown of some of the work that we do. So we're part of a larger global network called the Aga Khan Development Network, which is founded and guided by His Highness the Aga Khan. So I get that question a lot. It's like, who is this Aga Khan? Is that a person? Is that a thing? So founded by His Highness the Aga Khan, the Aga Khan Development Network is a global network that brings together several different development agencies and institutions and programs that are working in 30 different countries. And primarily we're working in some of the poorest parts of Asia and Africa. So one of those agencies is Aga Khan Foundation Canada. So that's us here in Canada. And we've been working in international development for 40 years now. And we partner with communities, with businesses, with schools, with governments, all to find innovative and lasting solutions to global challenges. So again, so we're working in Africa and Asia and really promoting inclusive development that enables women and men to unlock their own potential. So it's really about sparking transformative change and bringing, you'll see a lot of our work focuses on a lot of hopeful stories. That's not to say that some of the situations are not very difficult, but you will see that the work that we do really is about community-driven development and allowing communities to lead that change. So let's look at what we're going to cover today. So I'll just give you a second to read those outcomes. You don't need to hear me talk all morning at you. So really, we're going to talk about these themes, but we're really going to focus on making sure that you leave the session with practical tools and resources. So that's one of the things that we really want to make sure that you leave with. As I said, I mean, time is tight. Time is even tighter now. Some people might be finding that they have more time for professional development now and for digging through that wish list of things that you'd always wanted to look through. But we know that even more than before, the time on teachers is tight and is restrained. So we want to make sure that you can get the most bang for your buck out of this 1 hour session. So one of the things we are going to be using as well is this Inspiring Global Citizens resource, and Michelle can put the link up for us here in the chat box so that you can download that if you haven't already. So we're going to be referring to that PDF as we go through. So really at the heart of this is how do I foster global citizenship, teach about sustainable development, and support learners in making a difference. So not just about teaching that sustainable development and understanding it, but going a little bit further to make sure that we're helping these learners feel like they have some agency and that they can see change and make change. We don't want to just oppress them with a lot of sad stories. We want to make sure that they're having a deep understanding of these issues and then also can take action. So if you haven't already, you can go to our educator page. I'll get Michelle to put the link up there as well, only because that little shortcut, of course, this morning just broke on us. So Michelle will pop the link in the chat window there. But you can go to ATFC's education page for a number of different resources. You can sign up for our newsletter, and then you can also, you'll be able to download the guide here as well. So I see that Michelle's put the link for the guide there, which is great. So we've been working with educators, and we have been working for educators for the last 10 years or so here in Canada. And we've been hearing from a lot of teachers that they want to talk about these issues of international development, sustainable development, or perhaps their students want to talk about these issues, but they're feeling uncomfortable, right? They don't know where to start. They don't know who to trust as a resource. They don't want to say the wrong thing. So this lesson plan and this guide that we put together for teachers, we started this about 5 years ago. And we knew that we had expertise in sustainable development, but that we wanted to work with teachers that had the expertise in crafting these lesson plans. So we worked with a curriculum developer and then also some peer reviewers, so some teachers that helped co-create and co-develop the resource to make sure that it was going to be the most useful. And we put together activities and lesson plans that will help you explore these ideas with your students. So it goes in 4 sections and follows sort of a cohesive theme. So talking about awareness, right? Looking at the world around us, moving into understanding. So talking about the issues of quality of life, how do we measure quality of life? There's a lot of great activities in there if anybody is working with statistics and graphing and maps and mapping data to talk about quality of life. And then unpacking these ideas of sustainable development, like what is long-term development and how can sustainable development be achieved? And then, as I said, moving into this 4th piece here of taking action. So we knew that we came with years of experience in development and wanted to connect with teachers about their learning process. And so that's why we worked with teachers to create it. So you'll also find that throughout the lesson plan, we've included things like little backgrounder boxes and information, so that if there is something that you're talking about that's a new subject for you or a new subject for your students, it gives you that bit of extra information to dig into this. The other thing that we've done is that at the end of each section, there's an extra list of resources so that you can dig deeper. So if it's something that you're really keen on, or maybe that your students are really keen on, then they can go even further. We've had some teachers that have, run with one idea and gone for it for a whole term or a whole semester. And the way that we have put together all of the resources, they really are about student-driven learning and student-driven discussion. So you'll already know this, but the advantage of that is then if your students want to, sorry, I feel like I'm talking to a void here. I'll turn my camera back on for everybody. If you feel, if there's something that your students are really curious about and they want to go and explore deeper, they're going to do that. It leaves you that room to explore and gives you some more sort of choose your own adventure paths for your students. Or if you're using this, say with lower grades, younger grades. So the content of the resource was designed around secondary students, but we have lots of teachers that are using this with their middle grade school, sort of intermediate and some junior students. So you'll be able to know your class and your students, and you might take, the introduction activity in one section and do that and just use it as an opener for those conversations. Whereas other students might use that introduction activity, but spend a whole hour having a conversation about it and exploring it. So there's lots of opportunity for adjustment for you as you use the resource. And I know there was a question in the chat window there about is it available in French and English? So the resource is available in French as well. And Michelle's put the link there right in the chat window. And we have made our best effort to try to not have it just be a mirrored version in French, just a direct translation. We tried to find meaningful French equivalents to things. But if you are already teaching in French in this area, you'll probably know that there is a challenge about finding resources out there in French. So we have done our best to make sure that we had French equivalents, not just an English equivalent with a subtitle, but you will notice if there is a case where it's in English only, we've marked that in the resource as well. So I wanted us to start off with a bit of a short video that you can use with your students, particularly because this is something that you'll be able to use easily right now, either by sending it by email to your students or through some kind of a virtual classroom. So what I'm going to ask is if I'm going to ask Michelle to put the link up in the chat window for you. And instead of screening this through, I am just going to pause for a minute and allow you to look at it on your own screens at home, just because the bandwidth will lag if we try to do it. So I want you to take a minute and click on the link that Michelle has shared there. Thanks, Michelle. And take a few minutes to watch the video and then a few minutes to jot down some of the questions, your answers to some of these questions we have on the screen. If you're using the worksheet that we sent through, you'll see there's a box on the worksheet there that has the link for the video as well. But so I'm going to pause for a minute here and give us 5 minutes to watch the video and then reflect on the questions. And if you're feeling comfortable, I encourage you to post some of the answers to those questions right there in the chat window. So maybe just put the number of the question and your answer right next to it. So I'm going to pause for a minute now and let you all go and watch the film. So take a few more minutes to finish the film and to think about some of those questions. And then, as I said, if you're feeling comfortable and ready, just leave some of your thoughts and your ideas and answers to some of those questions in the chat window there, so that also we'll see where everybody's at and if they've had a chance to look at it and how they're feeling. This is great. I see lots of answers coming up in the chat window. You know, how are you feeling? One word to describe your reaction to the video, right? I see solidarity, humbled, truth, together, compelling, inspired, heartache. Oh, in a good way though. Interconnected. So I'm going to give you a few more minutes to think through some of the other answers to some of those questions. So I'm just noting down here, I see some people have got some good comments here and about how they've used it or some ideas. And we're going to have some time to talk about that as well at the end. So I'm just making note of some of those here so we can come back to them. Excellent. There's some really great answers here in the chat window. So if you're not over there, please go over to the chat window so you can see some of the answers here. You know, this video is so great. I love using this video with students and with educators. You know, particularly right now, I think this video is going to be, you know, something that's really going to hit home, pardon my pun, is going to really resonate, I think, with learners, but also with families, right? We remember that a lot of our students are at home right now doing this learning at the kitchen table. So I think this will have some really, really interesting at-home kitchen table conversations. But this is such a great video, you know, an obvious one for us when we were having to put this, you know, intentionally today, think a little bit more about our geography lens. I mean, for us, for Michelle and I, it's such an obvious fit, like we said at the beginning, right? I mean, this idea of interconnectedness connects things like the global goals, like global issues with our geography work and our social studies. But you know, this video is really going to help connect students and connect people with some of these ideas. Also think about the globalization of your classrooms, right? Think about how your learners are now coming from so many different backgrounds and how that's changing the dynamic in your classroom and how we can be looking at similarities as opposed to looking at differences. You'll see that as we go through the workshop today. As a rule of thumb, I am always challenging people to, you know, look for the hopeful side of things, look for the similarities. It's so easy for us to think about some of these global issues and challenges and to right away be thinking about, you know, what's devastating about the situation and what's heartbreaking about this. And it takes a little bit more effort, but you know, it's that next layer of conversation to think about what's hopeful and what's positive about the situation and what opportunities are there. So some of these, I mean, you can do, you'll already be having ideas, I'm sure, about how you can be thinking about this in the sense of virtual learning as well right now. You know, but you can find the word that is most common for question one, you know, and then have really deep discussions about the other questions here, right? What are some ways that demonstrate that people around the world are closely linked? Well, look at this global cooperation that we are in the middle of right now, right? With this pandemic. I mean, you know, we're really seeing the connectedness of our globe, both its strength and its weaknesses. You could have whole conversations about both. So this idea of the benefits of the challenges of this closely connected world. So, you know, as we think about this, this is something that you'll find right there on page 5 of the resource. So you'll find I've taken these questions, they're only very slightly adapted for what we're doing today. So you can see that there's a whole other section that you can start to dive a little bit deeper into it on page 5 of that resource online. You know, but we think about things, you know, it's going to start to spark these conversations about how, you know, we have access to opportunities just by the sheer luck of where we're born in the world and what kind of circumstances. It's going to spark conversations about inequalities. It's going to spark conversations about, you know, some of the big challenges that we face in the world, right? So if we think about those big challenges, you know, we've got climate change, there's poverty, there's food insecurity, gender inequality, armed conflict, you know, global pandemics and medical crises, you know, all of this has an impact on our quality of life. And so, as I said, starting on page 4 in the guide, there's a whole section that's going to unpack this idea of quality of life. Unfortunately, we have a bit of an abridged session today because we didn't want to take up too much of your time, but I do encourage you to explore that section, especially if that's a topic that you're interested in. There's lots of different activities there. But it's not all bleak, right? I mean, we don't want to leave our students or ourselves today just feeling like, you know, that there is all of these challenges, that it's so difficult. So, you know, as I said, we're currently experiencing one of the greatest examples of this global cooperation that I think we've seen in a long time. And when we think about what the global response is to some of these global challenges that might have come up and these issues in the video, like the one that we just watched, there is a global response, and that global response is, as mentioned at the end of that video, is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So maybe just a quick pop in the chat here. Give me a yes or a no if you have heard before about about the global goals and about the goals for sustainable development. Yes, lots of yes. Excellent. Okay, great. So some have lots have heard about it, some have not. Excellent. I'm seeing lots of yeses come up. So I'm not going to dive too deep into the global goals right now, but I do want to give you a number of resources available that will help you if you want to dig into the global goals, because I think it's such a great way to connect students and adults. I mean, we use this in all of our work with grown-ups and with students. So the global goals are a global response to these issues. There are 17 of them. Why are there 17? Because it's complicated, right? Because development is complex. We're going to explore that in a second. But there is no easy answer or easy solution to any of these challenges that might have come up in your conversation with that first video. And so the other thing that's interesting about the global goals is that it's a global response that all 193 nations in the United Nations have signed on to these. So that means that these global goals they belong to all of us. They belong to us here in Canada. They belong to your students. You might be in a rural setting, maybe in an urban setting. They belong to all of us. So how can we get students starting to make those connections? Like, we often hear this idea of like, well, why should I care about what happens to somebody overseas? I got my own issues right here. But it's really not about an us and them, right? That we are all connected. So all of these resources are hopefully trying to get the students making those connections about how we all fit together. So let's jump in. I want to share with you a few really great resources here. So if you don't know these already, not that we need any more time to get stuck down a YouTube rabbit hole right now, but the Global Goals has a huge YouTube channel or a huge list of videos on their YouTube channel. And they are listed by languages. So you will notice that there are some French videos, lots of English videos, and some other languages as well. And the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, have a huge list of resources also on their main website. So the globalgoals.org is another one. And then there's also the world's largest lesson. So if you haven't explored that yet, I encourage you to do that as well. So that's got a lot of different classroom materials, printable materials, lesson plans, things that you can explore. And so you can see that Michelle has posted the links for us there, so you can go to those different websites as well. And another thing that's very popular for anybody that is active on Twitter, so the hashtag #TeachSDGs is also a really popular one online. So I encourage you to share some of the things that you're doing, or if you have questions about them. There's a lot of teachers on there that would be happy to, it's a very active channel where there's lots of things happening and sharing best practices. And the other one too, if you're doing some activities, we would love to see about it. So you can tag us at AKF Canada so that we can see what the kind of things that you're up to. And the one other thing I want to mention, I think actually we have the Manitoba Council on the call here. I think Grace is here. If you have any questions directly for her, you can send her a note. But the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation has an amazing resource that is called the Sustainable Foundation. So it's a guide for teaching the Sustainable Development Goals. And they have gone through and they have activities and lesson plans and things that you can do with your students for every single one of the global goals. So all 17 of them. And they've also launched a new thing. You'll see on the right-hand side of their page, the Learn SDGs at Home, where they've teased some of those out to help families learning at home or to help you with your teaching right now in this unique situation, learning from home. So I really encourage everybody to go scope those ones out, because you could pick and choose any one of those and they would be great in your classroom right now, tomorrow. So as we said, though, I mean, if we're asking our students to think about these global issues, asking them to understand these challenges, to look at the global goals, we're really asking them to be global citizens. So just take a minute right now to think about, what is that definition of a global citizen? What does that mean to be a global citizen today? Fortunately, we're actually hearing that a lot right now. In the last month, I've heard the term global citizen more than I think I have in 5 years. But take some time to think about what that means and what that means to you, and pop your answers in the chat window there so that we can get a feel for how people are thinking. And one of the things to think about is, in another 10 years, when the global goals have run their course, so in the year 2030, it'll be time to, move into another plan. These are a 15-year plan, these global goals. So 10 years from now, a lot of your students will be the ones that are starting to be in those decision-making positions. So it's really important that we are creating global citizens now so that they're prepared for the world that they're living in 2030. So does anybody want to add anything to the chat box there about what is a global citizen? I'm going to tease out interactivity even though we're virtual. I like this idea. This idea of global citizenship is the idea to think global and act global. So actually acting on these thoughts. Someone who cares about social justice and human rights for all. Connecting the local and global community by collecting data, problem solving, taking action, connecting to other students from around the world, connecting to experts. I love this. I love this. This is really great. People who understand their actions here make a difference elsewhere. I'm obviously speaking to the right crowd. You guys are global citizenship experts. So yeah, this idea, belonging to a broader community and a common humanity, this interdependence, right? This connectedness, this local, national, and global. And as you mentioned here, right, this idea that, building the knowledge and the skills and the values, right, and the attitudes that learners need to be able to contribute to a more inclusive, equitable, just, and peaceful world. And we already know the answer to these, right? I mean, the global competencies for global citizenship really can fit into so many different subject matters and subject areas that, it doesn't have to be just this one teachable that you have on your plate this year, that there are lots of ways to include these ideas and some of these concepts into different areas within the curriculum in our different classes. So this idea, so UNESCO has done a big report on global citizenship. And this idea really that learners demonstrate personal and social responsibility for a peaceful and sustainable world. So, even just by doing workshops like this, participating in this and having these conversations with our students, we are already contributing to one of the global goals. So target 4.7 for quality education talks specifically about sustainable development and creating learners as global citizens. So you get a big pat on your back. You guys are already working super hard towards one of these global goals for the SDGs. But so what is sustainable development, right? If we talk about this idea, we hear it a lot, sustainable development. What does that really mean though? What does that include and what does that involve? So what I want to do is I'm just going to take a quick pause here to see if there's any burning questions about some of the things we've covered. And then what I want to do is I want to move into this idea of sustainable development and I'm going to walk you through an activity that you can do with your students that will be a fun one that you can do virtually or one that you can do in the fall again live. Does anybody have any questions about what we've covered so far? Take a break for a glass of water. Okay, I'm just we will have some time at the end as well. And thank you to Michelle for also being such a great moderator in there and answering so many of those quick questions. So what I want to do, sorry, one sec, there's a question from Justin here. Anywhere to view all the SDGs, like to see 4.7, anywhere I could go in particular? I would say for all information about the global goals, I would go to globalgoals.org. So I'm gonna type that in here. Globalgoals.org is a great resource, and the world's largest lesson is the other one that's a really great one. And the Global Goals website has a whole section on resources where it'll give you can download, printable cards for all of the targets. They have a lot of different media resources that you can download and print or send or circulate or make your own visuals with. So that's a great one to look into. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to travel. We're going to travel virtually to Badakshan in northern Afghanistan. And what I'd like everybody to do is we are going to do a little bit of a visioning exercise here. So I would love for you to take a moment to center yourself. I'm sure we're all doing a lot of mindfulness right now. So we're going to take a quiet little moment right now and do an activity. So again, another great reason why this will be great with your students. I have done this activity with thousands of students. And I tell you, I've done this with groups that were super ants in their pants, that were having a hard time paying attention and sitting still. And then like magic, we sit down and start telling a quiet story and you can hear a pin drop in the room. So I encourage you to try this one with your students, especially at this time where maybe we need a little bit of a quiet time right now. So we're going to pretend we're going to travel to northern Afghanistan, to Badakshan. So the most northeastern part of Afghanistan, very mountainous, remote region. And this is where you live. This is this beautiful mountain range in the background, but because I know I have a lot of geography teachers here who understand natural landscapes, that also presents a lot of challenges. Being in some of the most remote mountainous regions in the world in Central Asia here. So I want you to close your eyes if you're comfortable. I'm going to turn my screen off even for you so that it's not a distraction. And I'm going to tell you a story. This is a story that is based on facts, but is a fictional story. And we're going to just take a second here to read through this. So close your eyes, take a moment. And I want you to imagine that you are a young woman, you're 18 years old, living in a small remote village in the province of Badakshan in northern Afghanistan. You grew up there and recently married a young man from the same village. Your husband is a day laborer at a nearby farm, and the nature of his work is seasonal, so you don't always get a steady income. You also have some work at the farm, but that too is not reliable. Your parents died a few years ago, so your younger brother lives with you, and you are responsible for him and his school fees, etc. And you're 6 months pregnant with your first child. Recently, you've been feeling weak and dizzy. You're not seriously ill, but things just don't seem right, so you decide to see a doctor. The closest clinic requires a long journey away across a mountain valley. You can't travel to the clinic by yourself. You'll need a male relative to accompany you because that's the custom in this part of the country. It's the planting season, and your husband is busy at work. He decides it's important to take you to the clinic, so he will forgo his wages for a few days. There's no transportation to the clinic, and it would take days to walk, so you rent a car and have to use the money you've been saving to buy school books for your younger brother. You leave early in the morning since it takes most of the day to get to the clinic. When you arrive, the clinic is very busy. It would be inappropriate for you to be examined by a male nurse or doctor. And the clinic has a female nurse, but she's away today on a training course. You'll have to come back tomorrow morning, which means that you have to dip into your savings again and pay for accommodations for the night. When you finally see a nurse, she runs a blood test. The test shows that you have anemia, a very common condition caused by a lack of iron in your diet. The nurse explains it to you, but iron-rich foods like dark leafy greens are not available locally, and meat and eggs are expensive, and so you rarely eat them. The nurse hands you a package of pills and ushers you out of the examination room. You're not entirely sure how many pills to take or how often. The instructions are written on the package, but like 70% of the people in Afghanistan, you and your husband cannot read. Your husband will need to ask one of the men in the village to read the instructions, as many of the women in your village cannot read either. If you don't take the supplements properly, your child will likely be born early with a low birth rate, and the cycle of poverty will continue. So I want you to take a moment now, and just before we jump back into things, I want you to take a quiet moment and think about how you feel at the end of the story. And if you're feeling comfortable, please go ahead and share it in the chat window. Hopeless, yeah, unsettled, overwhelmed. Yeah, frustrated, stuck. Oh yeah, Laura is feeling lucky. She's feeling herself lucky. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people sort of being a little bit disconnected, hearing the story about the woman, but then feeling grateful what they have, right? Yeah, it's heartbreaking, these unsustainable livelihoods, anxiety. Yeah, there's a lot of feelings, right? I mean, there's a lot out of her control as well. That's something that comes up a lot, right? That she's just feeling like it's one thing after another. And I will say, as I mentioned, this is something that's based on facts, but is something that was a fictional story that we created. But I worked very closely with my colleague who was a pediatrician for years in Afghanistan, who's a father of 5 girls who lives now here in Canada. He just got his Canadian citizenship. But when we were writing it together, I said, I was concerned that it was too much. And, he said, this is quite, there's a lot of things going on in the story. It could be worse and it could be better, depending on her circumstances and where she lived. So I want you to take a few minutes now. I know that the worksheet that we created is not as big. Normally I would do a big tabloid 11 by 17, but knowing that we probably can't print that at home, take a few minutes now you can jot them down on your sheet and also hop them in the chat window here and think about some of the challenges that she faced, right? What was she up against in the story? But I also want you to think about, as I promised at the beginning, I'm going to challenge you to think about the opportunities, right? Where were some of the positive things in the story? So pop those over in the chat window so that you can share some of those ideas. Right? We talked about, there was already somebody here that talked about this idea of, unsustainable livelihoods, right? That could go on both sides, right? That they both had an opportunity to be making some money. However, it seemed like it was pretty seasonal. There's also a lot of things that we've intentionally left out of the story, right? So it leaves some room for discussion with you and your students. Yeah, gender disparity. I had a group of young men in one of my groups. 2 interesting stories. One was about a group of young men. All the young guys were together in one group in the back of the classroom, but it was that table that kept talking about like, but miss, like, what if she could just have anybody in her family accompany her? Then her husband could keep working, and like her sister or her aunt or somebody else could take her, right? They were thinking about all these issues. And I did this with a group of pre-service teachers, and they were sitting right at the front, and it was 2 men sitting in their group. And finally, one of the guys said, well, I mean, I don't know how to write this, but, her challenge is being a woman. But is that a challenge? I mean, can I write that? Yeah. So, we see how gender equity plays such an important role in so many aspects of quality of life and livelihoods. Yeah, one of the positives here. So Ryan's mentioned here, access to healthcare. Absolutely. She had a clinic that she could go to. It wasn't right there in her village, but she did have access to healthcare. The pills that she did receive would be something free of charge that would be covered under her national health coverage. Yeah, opportunities, see a different place and to show personal resilience by just doing what she has to do to take care of herself and her unborn baby. Yeah. Opportunities, her husband and family that really care, right? They see the importance of this. Absolutely. How many of you, when you heard that story and I said, and you're pregnant with your first child, how many of you thought like, oh, how exciting. Oh, she must be so thrilled. Her family must be excited. Or how many of you thought like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that there's one more thing that she's having to deal with. That must be so scary. So yeah, somebody's saying, I thought, oh no, I thought one more thing, right? And we don't know, as we said, I mean, we don't know what the situation, we've intentionally left a lot of that information out, but just as an example, those are some of the interesting things that you can have conversations about with your students. Really challenge them to sort of flip it on its head a little bit. So the other thing you can do, I just realized what time it is, so I'm not going to dwell too much longer on that. But the other thing you can do is have them quickly go through or take more time, but for yourself, you can think of already a number of the different sustainable development goals that you can connect to this, right? We talked about reducing inequalities, number 10, sustainable cities and communities, or, number 9, infrastructure, right? How could she get to her hospital and clinic? Decent work and economic growth. So a number of these goals are easy to connect to. So this was taken directly from the resource on page 39. So I encourage you to try this with your students. It's, as I said, it's a great exercise and a way to start talking about those issues with your students. So when we look at this idea of sustainable development, right, we know that it's not just about building a hospital in her community, right? It's about embracing that complexity, right? There's so many different things going on, that she needs support in literacy, that she needs healthcare, that there needs to be more sustainable income for her and her family, education, opportunities for her brother, right? Like there's so many different things going on there, that these 6 things that I've listed here up on the sheet are things that you're going to want to start thinking of when you think about sustainable development, right? It's long-term development. It's working in partnership. And, we talk a lot about this idea of, a hand up versus a handout. And you'll see that in the guide as well as you get into that section. That a hand up is more sustainable than a handout, right? And that people are the key to their own development, and outside help should not be imposed, but that partnerships are key, and that poverty is complex. And so are the solutions, right? So, with all that knowledge and with all that information, we see these challenges like the one in Afghanistan that we just learned about, but starting on page 47 of the guide, there's a whole section here that talks about action projects, right? So invite your class and your students to accept the challenge to be great, right? To take positive action on a development issue. So ask your student things like, do the students think that they should take on some responsibility for solving challenges like world poverty? What advantages or disadvantages do they think their generation has over previous ones to tackle global problems? So instead of feeling powerless, like just because they can't vote, they have no power, what do they bring to the table, right? They're living in a very different world, a very connected world that world leaders didn't grow up in, right? So we're seeing that already in some of these more global movements to see how, how are young people perfectly poised to be making some of these decisions. So I would love to see you challenge your students to inspire them to really make change and to see that difference. Is anybody, maybe pop a quick note there in the section, is anybody already doing some independent study units maybe with their students, or is anybody doing anything, in their practice or something that they heard here that they want to share? I'm gonna switch things over here. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here. Just so that we can see. And if there's something that you want to share, I encourage you to pop it in the chat window, and I'm going to moderate that a little bit, and I'll be able to you can undo your microphone there if you want to share. So while you're thinking about that, I'll just mention that Erica had mentioned earlier when we watched the home video that she used this already with her class with grade 6 students with a language assignment. They were talking about Habitat for Humanity. And then she launched into global issues with those students, right? That it was such a good connection for them to start exploring this. So as we said, I mean, you can be talking about these issues through, all different teachables, that it doesn't just have to be social studies and geography or world issues, that there's lots of different areas. Is there anybody else that wants to share maybe one thing that they're doing in their practice right now that around some of these issues, maybe around the global goals or about international development? All right, well, I know I'm mindful of our time here. So what I'm gonna do is I encourage you to tag us at AKF Canada. If there's something you wanna share, use that hashtag Teach SDGs if you wanna sort of share with a community of practice as well. But there are a few things that you can do to get some more lesson plans. So one of the things that AKFC can do to help you is, so first of all, we have a YouTube channel that have tons of videos that you can use as case studies and examples right there with your students. So we have all sorts of playlists in French and in English. So all of our videos are available in French and in English. So I encourage you to look through there and to see if there's anything you can use with your students. There are a number of examples in the resource as well, in the guide. But then we also have a monthly newsletter that we send out for educators that has these short, easy to use lesson plans that you could use tomorrow, right, with your students in your classroom. So my hope is that we're leaving you a little bit more inspired, that you've got some more tools in your tool belt, that you're feeling like you've got places you can look and resources that you can dig into, so that you can dig into some of these issues with your students and hopefully inspire them to action. That you can get them involved, that you can have them do something. One of the other things you can do, Michelle's going to put a number of links in there for you in the chat box. But we have a fundraising initiative that's not active at the moment. Obviously, there's a lot of other things going on right now. But for next year, if your students are looking for ways to volunteer and to support some of these issues, that they can do that through our fundraising initiative. So all that information is available all on our website. And one thing I will remind you of too is we have an evaluation form. So again, that'll be in the email with the recording from the session as well that we'll send out to everybody. But we do encourage you to fill out that quick evaluation form so we can have some feedback on what worked well for you, what you want to see more of, so that as we're creating some more of these sessions, we would love to be creating things that you want to see. And don't forget that starting on Monday, we're going to be releasing new activities every day on that new online classroom platform with Canadian Geographic's education platform. So please stay tuned and follow us both on social media so that you can get all that information. So thanks everybody. Thanks for being here today. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your afternoon wherever you are, and that you are doing well with your family, and that you are doing well with your at-home practice with your students. Thanks everybody, and feel free to send me an email if you have any questions. Thanks everyone. Take care.